Good Wednesday morning. Welcome to Begin in the Word. We are coming again to Matthew chapter 24, beginning in verse 4. We'll read this text and study it again, but you'll notice this is the same text we looked at yesterday. And I thought this text was important enough we needed to unpack it in two different videos. The goal of our study yesterday was to see some of the big picture stuff, to see what some of the common views on Matthew 24 are, to see some of the weaknesses of those views, and to establish that some of Matthew 24 is typical of the entire Christian era. It's true even today, but Jesus does zoom in and focus in on a particular event that's going to happen in the lifetime of those who he's speaking to, and that is the destruction of Jerusalem. We also wanted to point out that a major theme in Matthew 24 and 25 is the delay of the coming of the Son of Man, and that contrary to the opinion of the apostles, the destruction of Jerusalem and the coming of the Son of Man were not connected together in one big event, that they were going to be separated by a period of time. And so we tried to set that out and demonstrate that in the text and see how this text introduces that idea. Today we're going to come back and look at this text at a little bit more practical level. What does this mean? How might this inform our day-to-day walk? Before we do that, though, let's look at an outline of Matthew chapter 24, beginning in verse 1, running through verse 44. There is some more material at the conclusion of this that jumps into some of the application, the parables, beginning in verse 45. We'll tackle that in a subsequent video. We're just looking through verse 44. What's the outline? Verses 1 through 3 are the question. Remember, this question is critical. The disciples ask, when will these things, that is, when will the temple be destroyed? When will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? That's the question that Jesus wants to sort out. The second section is verses 4 through 14, where Jesus describes the tribulations, plural. I want to emphasize plural here because he describes famine and earthquakes and kingdoms rising against kingdoms and the love of many growing cold, many tribulations that fall upon God's people. These are the tribulations that must take place. But there is a major tribulation coming in their lifetime. That is the tribulation of the fall of Jerusalem. This was really at the heart of their question. When will these things take place? And Jesus wants them not to get too worried. He says the Son of Man does not come at this time. So verses 15 through 22 relate to the tribulation of the fall of Jerusalem. Verses 23 through 28 demonstrate that this is not one and the same as the coming of the Son of Man. It's not the same event. They thought it was. Jesus separates it out by saying they're really two different things. In point 5, beginning in verse 29, Jesus then describes the coming of the Son of Man. And that takes place in those verses. Verse 6, he talks about discerning the signs of Jerusalem's fall. You'll be able to see the signs, read the tea leaves, as it were, learn the lesson from the fig tree, he says. But as it relates to the coming of the Son of Man, verse 36 through 44, there are no signs that precede this. So if you look at the color coding here, the dark green color here refers to things that Jesus says are true of the entire Christian age. He says all these things are going to take place. Don't get worried when you see them because the end is not yet. The mission of the church is to carry the gospel of the kingdom to all of the world. That's the church's mission. Don't get worried with the earthquakes and the famines. Those tribulations must take place. But to answer their question, there is a major tribulation. So dark green is the material that is true of the entire Christian age. The blue color, this is the material that relates to the fall of Jerusalem. And the yellow material relates to the coming of the Son of Man. And you say, how do you know that? Well, just look at the text. Jesus talks about the coming of the Son of Man in verses 23 through 28, verses 29 through 31, verses 36 through 44. He talks about the signs preceding the fall of Jerusalem in verse 32 and also 15 through 22. So just take all of this material and tie it back to this initial question. You will see what Jesus is talking about. So as we said yesterday, it's not all future. It's not all past. There is a true mixture of that coming together in chapter 24. Let's get back into our text, beginning in verse 4. I want to think about how this applies to you and I. I've said what Jesus describes here are the tribulations, plural, not the great tribulation. He's talking about the tribulations, plural, that are true of the Christian age. Some say, well, these are just the tribulations that lead up to the destruction of Jerusalem, and that Jesus gives this information so that when they see all these things taking place, they'll know to get ready. Let me ask you this. Find me a century of Christian history. Find me a moment in time in the last 2,000 years where all of the things Jesus describes aren't true. In every place, at every time, these things go on. These are the things that Jesus says they must take place in this Christian era of tribulation. First of all, there is the risk of being led astray by false messiahs. This is the first of the tribulations that we face today, that they faced then, and they are true for all time until Jesus returns. There will be those who come along and say, I'm the anointed one. I'm the answer to your problems. I am the Messiah coming to fix the world. And he says, they will lead many astray. Don't listen to them. See that no one leads you astray. Are there people in the world today that say, look at me, I'm God's chosen one to solve all the world's problems? You bet there are. And Jesus says, don't be led astray. Our allegiance as Christians must be so fully committed to the Son of God that everyone else we will recognize as an imposter. Don't let them lead you astray. They're going to lead many astray. Flip on your TV. See all the folks that draw people after them, after their teaching, after their perversion of the gospel. They will lead many astray. It breaks our heart as Christians to see so many people turn away from the gospel. But understand that what's going on today is a part of the tribulations that Jesus says are normal in the Christian period, that many will be led astray. He says you're going to hear of wars. You're going to hear of rumors of wars. There was all kinds of concern about what happened in Benghazi a few years ago, or what was going on in Libya, or before that, what was going on in Iran, or ISIS in Syria, or before that was Saddam Hussein in Iraq. And you can step back before that and you can look at Slobodan Milosevic and go before that and look at the Soviet Union and Mao and China, and back up just a little bit further and you see communism sweeping into Southeast Asia, and then there's Hitler, and then there's Stalin, and there's Mussolini. Just go all the way back. There are wars and rumors of wars. Christians, understand this must take place. Don't let it cause your faith to waver. Whenever you see things going on in the world, violence, wars, people rising up against people, nations, he says, rising against nation, recognize that these are just among the tribulations that Jesus says will occur in the Christian era. So the first tribulation are the false messiahs. The second tribulation are the nations rising against nations and all the wars and rumors of wars. And I want you to take to heart what Jesus says here in the middle of verse 6. See that you are not alarmed. We live in a world where we want to get alarmed. Our Facebook feed, our Twitter feed is full of things that get us alarmed. They get us worked up. They cause us to start to fret and to worry and to doubt the outcome of what God has promised. Jesus says, don't be alarmed. Yeah, you'll flip on your news. You might see violence going on in this country or other countries. Don't be alarmed. These things must take place. The end is not yet. There will be famines and earthquakes. Now, this is the third thing. So the first thing are the false messiahs. The second tribulation are the political problems that arise between nations and wars and rumors of wars. The third are natural disasters. I remember the tsunami that took place several years ago that impacted parts of India and Indonesia and in the Indian Ocean. It was a terrible tragedy. It was awful. And there are parts of the world where people go to bed hungry without something to eat. There are earthquakes that turn people's lives over in various places all over the world. There are these natural disasters. There are fires in California. There are tornadoes in Oklahoma. There are hurricanes on the Gulf Coast. Don't be alarmed. These are but the beginning of the birth pains. What Jesus is teaching against here is alarmism. He is teaching against those who get worked up and fret and worry about all these things taking place that they can't control. Jesus says, these things must take place. Don't worry about it. Don't get worked up about it. Don't follow after the false messiahs and don't get alarmed at these disasters. These are the beginning of birth pains. He says it can and it does get worse because they will deliver you up to tribulation. They will put you to death. And someone says, well, that's just the first century. And if you say that, you're having a very small view of Christian history. Maybe in America, we don't see tribulation and people being put to death, but it happens all over the world. Put to death. Tribulation. You will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Then many will fall away. This is the next tribulation. It gets worse. It's one thing to be facing tribulation, to be put to death, be hated. No one wants to be hated. But he says many will fall away. Christians will betray one another. They will hate one another. It's one thing to be hated by the outside. It's a totally different thing to be hated on the inside. But Jesus says it's going to happen. Did it happen in the first century? You betcha. Is it happening today? You betcha. Open your Facebook feed and see how Christians talk and think about one another. How they insult, how they undermine, how they question the intelligence of their fellow Christian. And they are betraying one another. They are hating one another. These are the birth pains of the Messiah. True then, true today. Many false prophets will arise, and this tribulation just brings us back to the false Christs. They lead many astray. And listen to what he says in verse 12. Because lawlessness will be increased. Lawlessness will be increased. It doesn't take much looking around to see that there are Christians who grew up in good, godly Christian homes that choose a life of lawlessness. They choose a life that turns away from God and his commandments, and they choose to live at their own whim and volition. According to their own lusts and desires, they are lawless, and it will increase. We think it's novel today. We think it's unparalleled today. Jesus says this is how it's going to be in the Christian era. Lawlessness will be increased. The love of many will grow cold. We see children speaking evil of their parents with hatred, grown adults speaking of their elderly parents with derision and scorn. The love of many grown cold. Mothers who should love their children choosing to put them to death in their own womb. The love of many growing cold. In the wake of all of these tribulations, the natural disasters, the political turmoil, the false messiahs, the hatred from the outsiders, the hatred and betrayal from the insiders, all of this going on in the Christian age, Jesus says, you have a mission. The one who endures to the end will be saved. The mission of each and every individual Christian is to endure to the end in the face of it. Let me challenge you, believer who is watching with us today. You may have loved ones, family, children, parents, brothers and sisters who forsake the Messiah. They turn away from Christ. Let it be your mission. Let it be your personal goal to say that if the whole world denies Jesus, I will endure to the end. There will be nothing that separates me from my love of the Messiah. And let it be our collective goal to bring the gospel of the kingdom throughout the whole world as a testimony to all the nations. That's our mission. It is not our mission to be alarmed, to go start radio programs where we start bemoaning the fact that all these tribulations are taking place and pretend as if it were new and novel in our time. The coronavirus is not the first pandemic to cause problems in this world. These things happen. This is a part of the tribulation that the world faces. Don't let it shake us up. In spite of that, let's resolve to endure to the end, to carry the gospel of the kingdom throughout all the world, to all the nations, with expectation that the end will come. The Son of Man will return, and he will redeem his children. Thank you for joining us today as we've begun in the Word of God. And as you have begun today in the Word of God, it is my hope that you live out today in the Word of God.